Welcome back to Local Decision 2020. I'm Rusty Ray, and we're joined now by the incumbent State House representative out of District 31B. It is the Republican. It's Cal Bahr. Thank you for being with us, Cal.
Thank you.
This election this year has got to be different than others you've run and other campaigns you've run in the past. Am I right?
Yeah, very different.
What about it is different, but in what ways are you still finding ways to connect and finding ways to get out there?
I suppose the similarities are you can still do mail, you can still do online advertising, you can do online outreach, but the person-to-person touch is much different. Candidate forums are, I've had one, and last year I had 3. The year before there was 2 or 3, 4 different places. The in-person touch is much more difficult to come about this year. I mean, it's almost impossible, and you can't knock that many doors. It's just, you know, the geographics of it just doesn't work. Right. So having places where you can say, come on out, if you want to come meet me, here I am, you know, give people a choice of 4 or 5 different places is always good. We have pretty much 0 choices this year.
In those ways that you are able to kind of glean information or get communication going, are you learning things about what people are looking for in St. Paul that maybe they weren't before? I know COVID's obviously there, but are you hearing anything besides COVID, I guess I should ask?
Severe frustration with pretty much everything. The COVID, why can't my business, why does this business get to work when mine can't? Why does this one get shut down and this one gets boosted? Why this with long-term care facilities? Why can't I go, my grandma's in hospice, why can't I visit grandma? You know, things like that are, so it's mostly centered around COVID, but you know, the government's reaction to COVID, and it's centered around that, but it's a lot of frustration is what I'm hearing.
So sticking with COVID for a moment, what can you say about the state's response and your role with some of those decisions, or maybe things that you didn't get a voice in that you wish you could have had a voice in?
Well, we'll go backwards on that. Okay. So the legislature pretty much has no voice in the COVID response. When it all first started back in March, we passed a couple of bills, gave the governor some money. We gave him a COVID panel of 10 legislators from between the House and the Senate and said, go spend, go do what you need to do, here's carte blanche, and we haven't been able to get the authority back. So once a month, by law, we need to meet and have a vote. Well, we don't need to have a vote. We need to actually be called into special session. Right. The Senate votes. We don't vote in the House, and then we adjourn and we wait another 30 days and the governor keeps doing whatever the governor deems necessary. As far as this, so that's the legislative involvement in that. As far as the response, I think it's a very heavy-handed response. It's not as nimble as it should be, and there's no way that one person can make a nimble response for 5.5 million people. This should be geared a lot more county to county, region to region, giving more autonomy back to school districts to say, here's some guidelines, here's what you should be looking for, here's how the virus reacts, here's what we know. Passing information to the people, local officials, to make local decisions would be a much better approach.
Well, and that sounds like what happened with the schools. Here, take a look at the numbers, make those determinations. Okay, sort of. So you would like to see that more widespread in terms of business regulations and guidelines and things like that?
Right. But now, as far as the schools go, the schools are set that their guidelines aren't just guidelines. There's also mandates behind that that said if you meet any of these, you must do this. So they've still taken the local autonomy away, and they've set them into such a manner that almost every school district at some point is going to end up having to fall into that you will do online learning.
Okay, I see what you mean. So given all of that, do you feel like issues or concerns that the state could have been focused on have been put by the wayside and pushed back because of this? And the immediate response, like you said, in the spring had to happen and get some things in motion, but then other things have been delayed, and certainly the economic ramifications that COVID has brought with it maybe have delayed some things too. Are there things that you wish could have been done in this year that did not get done?
Well, let's put it this way. The initial response, while I personally didn't agree with it, I understood it. I could live with a couple of weeks to get hospitals ready to go. Most Minnesotans understood we're taking 2 weeks. We're going to do the best we can with staying home, not move, essential jobs only. We're going to get the hospitals geared up with their PPE and ready to handle anything that comes their way. It went from we need 2 weeks to get ready to we need to flatten the curve to let's slow the spread. It's a virus. We've had thousands of viruses throughout human history. We are going to continue to have viruses. This is the government response to a virus is over the top. When you look at the mortality rates and the recovery rates, any statistic you want to, any way you want to measure this against other viruses, this is one of the tamest viruses we've had, and yet we're having the heaviest response to this. So this is all political, and it's not a service to the people of Minnesota, and you will get people absolutely fighting mad if you say anything derogatory about the way it's handled, because well, the governor's doing a great job. Well, you may think the governor's doing a great job, but if you put it in perspective of other viruses and you take the political element out of it, this is way over the top.
Not as simple as saying if it had happened in a non-election year, it would have been perceived or handled differently?
I'm thinking that if it would have been in a non-election year, yes, it would have been handled much, much differently. And you can see that in the way different states have handled this. You can see, they say, well, look at South Dakota, or look at Wyoming, or look at this state or that state, and they've got all these cases. Cases don't matter. Everybody, even the governor has said early on in this, everybody eventually will get this. You have to get herd immunity to stop a virus. That's the way all viruses have been stopped throughout human history, is herd immunity, which is about 80% of the people have contracted the virus and now they're not susceptible anymore. There are things that people are talking about, well, maybe it wears off, your natural immunity wears off over time. Well, maybe it does, but are we going to stay locked down for 4 or 5, 10 years to find out? You know, put some of these things into perspective of what are we going to do in the meantime. The governor has never come out and said, here's the game plan at the end. Here's how we get off of all these restrictions. Here's how we get back to business as usual. Here's how we go back to normal life. He's never said that. There is no plan.
As recently as last week, he did lay out a couple of thresholds, and not huge specifics, but it's a couple of thresholds for maybe backing off the executive powers.
Maybe, but that's not going back to business as usual. Okay. None of this has been laid out, and we're almost the 1st of October, so we're looking 7 months, 6.5 months, and we have no plan to exit this. The exit plan should have been at the beginning, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is what it's going to take to give the executive powers back, business as usual, autonomy back to the local school boards and local city councils and things like that.
Well, no matter what happens with COVID, when the session begins again in 21 with the new legislature, it is a budget process, or it's a budget year, staring at the ramifications, the economic ramifications of this huge now deficit.
Yes.
What do you say as ways that the state can deal with that in looking at spending or looking at the way it allocates resources across the board?
It's going to be ugly. Let's just say it's going to be ugly. Some of the automatic increases that were forced by federal mandates, some of our education spending and some of our healthcare spending, you will increase. I mean, to get your federal match, you're going to increase. I mean, so you put all those in, and what's left is what you've got to cut on. And we have, we mandate, we have to balance the budget. Must.
Right.
So you're talking anywhere from any budget projections are anywhere from $1.5 to $4 billion cut.
Right.
And education and healthcare are 75+% of the budget. So it's just going to be flat ugly. Everything's going to have to be on the table. There's going to be some programs that are just going to get discontinued. There's going to be some tax breaks that are going to be discontinued. Well, I mean, like things like, what would you call them? Some of the angel tax credit was one that was brought up, to lure new business into the state. There's things like that, those individual ones. Now, I don't advocate and I will not vote for any income tax increase, sales tax increase, things like that, the overall broad, which is where the real bulk of the money comes from. So It's going to be program cuts, and we're going to get rid of a lot of duplicitous stuff because there is plenty of that to go around.
A couple of your colleagues, and a couple of them Republicans, and a couple of challengers have sat in that chair this week and said that they ought to look at the reserves that the state has to at least get out of this hole and to
That's
kind
what
of
they're
right
there
the
for.
ship.
Yep.
A rainy day, and someone said, "Well, this
It's
is
raining.
this is the rainiest of all." Yeah. So would you think that that's?
I expect to use most, if not all of it, yes, and still have budget cuts. I mean, we've got a little over $2 billion in the rainy day fund. If we got to cut 4, you still got the rainy day fund 2, and you hope that you can get to the next budget cycle and get things back on track where you're not having to come back in the next in the midterm and make some more adjustments to the budget.
I understand the cuts that I understand what you're talking about, and the need for cuts and the need for looking at all programs. It spells kind of a gloomy picture for education in a time when schools seem to be fraught with the challenges of dealing with the distance learning and the different models and all those things. But education in the state, it seems like it's a scary place for that.
Everything. I mean, healthcare or education, they're the 2 biggest ones. So you can pick either one of them. It's a scary proposition for either one of those. Well, in this when you're in a budget deficit, a down cycle. There are some, I don't know how you want to, some people would look at this as a positive. I choose to look at it as a positive, but with the distance learning and with budget shortfalls, this is a really good time to look at the overall budget formula. I've been talking about this since I actually saw the formula. It's a book that's 1/4 of an inch. It's, about 3/8 of an inch thick. That's the funding formula for schools. That has nothing to do with education. This is the formula for funding schools. That's a little complicated. It's extremely complicated. It's time to streamline this so not only the local school districts, but parents can start looking at how is our money spent? Is it spent wisely? Not based on, I get, the money should follow the student, wherever the student's at. We already have open enrollment in any public school, so you can take your children to specific charters or things like that. But we have more and more parents that are looking at homeschooling also. Well, that's taking kids out of the public school, but why can't we do some kind of funding for homeschool parents? So that if you're going to take on the responsibility of educating your child, you're still paying all the taxes to the school, why can't we reallocate some of that back here and alleviate some of the pressure on the school system? Maybe you don't have to increase this, maybe you don't have to increase something else because there's less students there.
Okay, let's get out of here with this. When you go back to the halls of the state capitol, looking for your 3rd term there, what do you know are the concerns and the needs of folks in your district? What is particular, do you think, about your district, whether it's the geography? You mentioned folks are spread out, from the southern end where it's a little more densely populated to other parts where maybe not. Is there anything in particular about 31B that you're bringing their concerns to St. Paul?
The one thing that I have said since the first day I was elected and had it confirmed, I guess, probably within the first week was we are not transparent at the Capitol. Nobody in the district really knows what's going on. Everything is obfuscated to the maximum so that nobody in the state can really know. We have a tendency to pile, my first term, I had it was the end of the first term, the supplemental budget bill was 990 pages, 1 vote, and it covered everything in the state. How can that not be a violation of the state constitution, which forbids omnibus bills, multi-subject bills? But yet the Supreme Court has said that's okay. So there's a disconnect here, and what what I've learned and what I am advocating for and am working and gaining support every term for is a definition. It just says single subject. We need to define single subject so the court will have clear guidance to say that a 900+ page bill that covers every topic in the state is actually a violation of the state constitution. So that's what I'm working for, so that the people can actually have a clear understanding of where their legislator stands on the different issues, and this statewide, whether their legislator is actually representing them, not just representing a party that they happen to belong to, but actually representing them and their beliefs, and they're not hiding behind, well, I had to vote for it because this was in there, kind of thing.
Okay. Representative Cal Bahr, thank you very much.
Thank you.